morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Wednesday webinar series. Today we are featuring Sparrow. Our presenter today is Harrison Hochman. He is the co-founder and CEO of Sparrow. At 21, Harrison started Sparrow in his parents' backyard during the height of the COVID pandemic, and within 16 months had raised $7 million in venture capital, facilitated over $400 million in pre-qualified student loans across 30,000 plus borrowers nationwide. Please join me in welcoming Harrison.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dean. And for those who have joined live, it is great to have you on the Cut discussion live this morning. And for those that are watching asynchronously, my name is Harrison Hochman. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at Sparrow. And today we're going to be talking about how to win wallet share, create those sticky multi-product relationships with membership. Now, if we were doing this conversation live in person, what I usually start out with is a pulse check in the room. I want to understand for all of those who are attending, if they wouldn't mind, raising their hand and holding it high for those that feel like they have room for improvement when it comes to attracting, engaging, and retaining different pockets of membership. What I usually find is all hands go up. And then when I ask the follow-up question, if they could please keep their hands raised, if they feel like they have a plan to confidently win back membership from, say, big banks and fintechs over the next 12 months, almost all hands go down. That delta between a hand being risen and lowered is exactly why we're here. That's what we're going to solve during today's time is how do we craft that plan to maintain a semblance of a very sticky multi-product relationship with membership, especially for those younger pockets of individuals. Before I dive in to talking about how to achieve this, I actually want to start with a story. Specifically, that's my story of how I get wrapped up in all of this. If you can believe it, that story begins about 6 years ago. And if I rewind the clock 6 years in my personal history, despite what you might think by looking at me live today, it does not land me at 15 years old. It lands me squarely between my undergraduate and graduate degree at Stanford. And if you can even stretch your imagination any further to envision the fact that I looked even younger back then than I do currently right now. You see, I would be on Stanford's campus for many years, but there was one consequential coffee that changed the course of my life. So I was having coffee with a close mentor of mine, and he drives to lunch in this brand new car. So I asked him, "How'd you pay for the car?" And his response back to me was, "I got an amazing rate from my dealer." I said, "Great. Which lender? I'm about to graduate. I'll check him out." And he says, "The dealer." I said, "That's impossible. Dealers aren't lenders. Who is the lender?" He had no idea. So we go through his phone and I find the latest payment receipt. Turns out he was making payments to Stanford Federal Credit Union. So I asked him, almost as a joke, "Do you know what a credit union is?" And his response back to me was not a yes or no, but more hauntingly was a question, which was, "What's a credit union?" Now, for some context, this guy isn't a fool. He was extraordinarily smart at Stanford, my intellectual crutch to help me get through the hardest engineering courses. And yet his response to the very basic question of, "Do you know what a credit union is?" was shocking enough to me that it prompted me to pull that thread even further. So what I did is go out to credit unions in the area and ask them, "Do you also face a similar challenge where you have members that come to you looking for rates, not relationships?" And every single one said yes. Upon understanding what those different pockets were, we began to identify different pockets of elusive membership that might come to the credit union for one initial purpose, but nothing deeper. Those might include, but aren't limited to, those Gen Z members, indirect auto loan members, even sometimes direct loan members that come in search of a rate, not a broader relationship. The list goes on and on. So in my mind, I started to wonder why. Why is it that increasingly there is this challenge of deepening wallet share with membership engaging the credit union? And upon pulling that question of why, I came across some startling truths. The first is default is not the loyalty anymore among my generation. So Gen Z, defined as the ages between 17 and 28 years old, only 4% of my generation of Gen Z actually banks with a credit union. For some context, this might be one of the more counterintuitive stats I came across because if you think about it, what does my generation want more than others? We want organizations that are deeply aligned with our values. We want organizations that have deep rooted local connection into our communities. And yet we are statistically the least likely to be banking with the very organization and movement that delivers on those promises. Pulling that thread even further, if you want to unravel and unpack why only 4% of Gen Z banks with a credit union, I gave a little hint at it earlier. Default is not our loyalty anymore. If you look at it, Gen Z are a little bit more than 3 times more willing to switch to the next FI in search of a better digital experience. Intuitively, we were the generation born with an iPhone. We have come to expect the services to be provided to us and meet us where we are. And we are extremely uncompromising in meeting others where they are. Now, pulling that thread further, it shouldn't be encouraging to learn that effectively 3 in 4 of members of the Gen Z variety and millennials identify as their sole top priority of finding a financial partner, not the rate of the APR or the height of the APY, but simply one particular priority, which is feeling like their financial institution knows them. However, if you think about how credit unions in the past have delivered on the essence of personalized relationship, demonstrating that one knows them, traditionally it's through a branch. Member walks in, branch manager or staff remembers the member. It's that people helping people difference. Unfortunately, branch visits, not just for Gen Z, but all of membership, have been on the decline. And it's probably not startling for me to share this with the audience on the call today, as you've probably experienced this. And it's a trend that started well before COVID. COVID was for sure an accelerant to it, but it's continued through to this day. Over the last 14 years, there's been a 21% decline in the in-branch visit. And if you specifically zoom in on that pre-COVID population, the decline is also continuing with COVID being that accelerant. So, to take stock of the picture that's been created so far, it may seem pretty bleak. We have these younger individuals, Gen Z millennials, where default is not the loyalty is not the default anymore. And 3 in 4 of them will represent that their top priority in an FI is feeling like they're known, but they're unwilling to come into a branch where that level of personalization can be provided. I did not come on today's webinar to raise the alarm bell and siren solely. I came because despite this bleak picture, I'm actually quite excited about the future. Specifically, I envision a future not just for Gen Z, but for membership at Broad, where PFI status is the norm, not the exception. So it begs the question, given the bleak state of the current present, how do we get to this future? Well, like any great problem, if you want to eat a large sub, you've got to start with a small bite. So let's decompartmentalize how to get to this future. Specifically, we have to begin by regrounding in some truths. What's made the credit union successful historically? What has been the bedrock and the foundation for our growth? Next, we have to translate those historic learnings into an actionable framework for the future. And finally, I would be remiss if I went through this entire presentation during the time today, giving you armchair theory without a practical blueprint for execution and implementation. So the final section of today's time is going to be talking about how to activate and action on the insights that we explore at the top of it. Diving in, let's go ahead and do an analysis on what's made the credit union successful in the past. To do that, what I'll offer is a color-coordinated breakdown of membership to date, which you can largely crop into three big buckets. The first, and just to explain what you're looking at here, what you'll see on the x-axis, you'll see that all the way on the right-hand side, on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you have representation of lower wallet share. And as you go left, representation of higher wallet share. On the y-axis, you have an engagement preference of membership. The higher up you go, the more digital they become. The lower down you go, the more in-person their preference is. So if you then use that guide, those perspectives, to chart membership, here's what you'll find. You largely have three big buckets of membership. The first are those core members. This one's easy. It doesn't need too much explanation. That's the bedrock of the credit union. The second are those non-relationship members. Traditionally, that are more digital and have a lower wallet share. Who are these individuals? Well, they take many different forms and flavors, but predominantly they're individuals that if you did the litmus test of, if I offered the lowest APR in the US, the highest APY, would they bring over their book of business? And if the answer is no, because they've been banking with B of A for 45 years, as an example, and have no interest in switching, they're a non-relationship member. But in the middle, we have those at-risk members. Now, who is an at-risk member? Well, they also take many different forms and flavors, but at its core, an at-risk member, by definition, is anybody that can go in either direction. They could go toward non-relationships, or they could go towards core membership, depending on the credit union's ability to meet them where they're at when the need arises, not before it to be too salesy, and not after it to not capture an opportunity. These individuals are traditionally your digital natives, the ones who are totally fine banking on a phone. In fact, want to do that, it's their preference, but are going to invest loyally digitally. Or you have those single transaction members who came in looking for a single transaction that could be on the lending side or depository side, could be open to a broader relationship if the credit union offered a need or solution to their need when the need arose. So visually, what we're talking about, the purpose of today's time, to minimize the hands that go up and the hands that go down when asked about the plan to create sticky relationships, what we're trying to do here, we're not trying to win every battle every time. We're trying to win the battle in the orange. We're trying to convert those at-risk members to core membership, or said otherwise, take this green line and shift it outward. So it begs the question, how do we do this? How do we reliably convert not all of membership, but at-risk membership to core membership? It's a $1 million question that has a very simple answer. The answer is not difficult because it's complex. The answer is difficult because traditionally it takes an exorbitant amount of time. The answer is if the branch has been the foundation for relationship building in the past, and we have to build relationships in order to convert at-risk membership to core membership, the only conclusion is we have to take what's worked well in a branch for that level of communication and export those insights digitally to meet the members where they are, not expecting the in-branch visit, which begs the question, Well, what are the core ingredients that make that in-branch interaction so potent? These three key ingredients are what I would go so far as to argue make every interaction of a great MSR impactful to inspire trust with membership. Those three are timing, targeting, personalization. I'll explain each in detail in just a moment, but at a high level, timing is the idea that we work backward from the member timeline, not the credit unions. And I'll give you different examples of what this looks like in person versus digitally historically. The second is once an MSR in a branch has identified the opportune time to have a conversation with a member about a product, you best believe they first identify the need for that product first before suggesting it. Else they risk eroding trust with members. Member might feel like the MSR is pushing a product on them they don't need. So the second step of what a good MSR does in person is they follow member need as the means of justifying promotion for a product versus anything else, like, for example, the absence of that product with the member. And finally, the third piece here is personalization. The easiest way to understand personalization, which I'll give examples for a little bit later, is a quote from Golda Meir. The quote is, "People won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel." The goal of personalization is to make someone feel the people helping people difference. So we have our plan. It's pretty straightforward. If we're going to convert those at-risk members to core members, or said otherwise, take this green line and expand it outward, the plan is very simple. We have to do what we would have done in a branch, but bring it to the member digitally. That is to say, we have to time, target, and personalize like a good MSR would had the individual walked into a branch, but bring that to the digital sphere. Which now begs the question, how do we translate these three key insights into a framework for the future? That's where we'll head off to next. Now, let me just start by grounding in, before we get to the translation, let me ground in some of the disconnect that I see today. On the Sparrow side, we work with well over 100 credit unions, now in 42 separate states. So I've seen a lot of this. In fact, I recently joined the board of a $2 billion credit union in Warren, Ohio. I'm one of their newest directors. And I can tell you from both the board perspective and from the perspective that I sit in, having worked with so many credit unions across the US, here's what we see as a disconnect between what happens digitally versus member expectation. And these are real examples of action being done by the credit union versus how it was perceived from the member. The first one was, I was chatting with this credit union and they said, well, we just changed our auto loan. I bet our members could benefit from it. And they did a mass blast. From the member perspective of someone who received that blast, their direct quote was, why am I receiving a note about a auto loan that I'm currently drowning in payments from? A second example of this disconnect was a credit union mentioning that rates had dropped, and they believed that membership could take advantage of their mortgage rates, as rates had been so high historically. So they did a mass blast. The response from a member that I was talking to was they already have a mortgage. They don't need one. That message to them proved the credit union didn't really know them, but they did happen to get at the exact moment around the same time a HELOC opportunity from Wells Fargo that sounded interesting to them. And third and finally, I hear often that with rates persisting high, we're getting squeezed, and core deposits are especially a priori to the credit union. The response that I heard from a member who received a mailer about the depository products at the credit union was, if I receive one more mailer about a high yield savings account I don't need, I'm going to remove my mailing address from this credit union. All of this, by the way, is done always with the best of intention. The credit union the intention is never to bring out these types of perspective for membership. Unfortunately, what we find is there's this disconnect between the level of service that's being executed on in a branch versus what usually happens in the digital sphere. Let me pull this thread even further and give you examples specifically in the context of the targeting, timing, and personalization that we were talking about previously. So let's start with targeting. What we usually see happen successfully in a branch when someone comes in an MSR or loan officer adequately targets is the following example. So imagine a member walks into a branch and they apply for an auto loan. Your loan officer pulls their credit file and sees there is a $5,000 credit card debt at American Express at a 20% APR. I believe that your loan officer is trained to identify that as a problem. They would then offer your personal loan as a solution to said problem. That's the perfect level of targeting. The need for the member is a high interest rate credit card being consolidated. The solution is your personal loan. One-to-one match. Beautiful job on targeting. Compare that to the types of promotions we usually see happen from a credit union digitally. And again, this is the best of effort, the best of intention from the credit union. It's the fault of the tooling they have access to that doesn't allow them to easily get a level of targeting that would have happened in a branch. So what we usually see happen digitally for targeting is instead of framing the personal loan as a solve for those who have high interest rate credit cards, we'll promote a personal loan in August to membership. Why? Well, because it's August. As you can imagine, two different types of conversion come from those two different types of in-person versus digital promotion. Not to mention, two different types of relationships are being built. The former, on this side on the right, is inspiring trust. The latter is risking eroding it. Now let's talk about timing. Well, when timing is done well in a branch, it can look like the following. Member comes in, MSR sees they've got a dropping FICO and fast momentum is going in the wrong direction. And the MSR might suggest that they introduce a fresh start loan to help them with the change in their FICO score. Now, think about the timing of when that suggestion comes through. It's based on when the member need arises. They don't think about the fresh start loan as a part of an onboarding workflow. That wouldn't make sense. It's only when the need arises does the product get suggested. Now, compare that to the timing of what we usually see happen digitally. And by the way, to no fault of the credit unions, it's the fault of the tooling that they're using to action on this insight. So what we usually see happen digitally is there is an onboarding flow, if that, maybe a 30, 60, 90, 120, 180 day onboarding flow. And at the eclipse of a 30-day, time frame, the credit union might check to see, well, does this member have, an auto loan? And if no, suggest the auto loan. Or at day 60, has the member enrolled in e-statements? If no, suggest the e-statement. As you can imagine, two different types of relationships are being built. The former here, when the timing is based solely on the member timeline, is inspiring trust. The latter, of when it's based on these arbitrary points in time of 30, 60, 90 days, might risk eroding it. And lastly is personalization. So what an MSR will do, on top of appropriate targeting and timing when they're having a conversation in person, is they'll create bespoke messaging for the individual that they're talking to. Here's the easiest way to explain this. Imagine that I am 16 years old. And I know that you guys probably looking at me think to yourselves, I don't have to stretch my imagination all too far to envision the fact that you're 16 years old. But bear with me here. Do the mental gymnastics to make the stretch and say that I am 16 years old. And I walk into a branch and I speak to an MSR about a checking account. I go into your branch and I speak to your MSR about a checking account. I then leave. Let's say my older brother walks into that branch and he's 26 years old. And he goes up to the same MSR, asks about a checking account, and leaves. Even though I, at 16, my older brother at 26, are only 10 years apart, we occupy different worlds. I would be 2 years away from graduating high school. my older brother would be 5 years out of graduating college, already in the workforce. Evidently, the needs that we have for a checking account are completely incongruous. They're totally different. And so I would hope that the message the MSR gave to me about the benefits of your checking account are totally different from the benefits highlighted to my brother, despite the fact that we're only 10 years apart and the MSR is talking about the same product. So, what we usually see happen as successful personalization in a branch is bespoke product messaging that's age dependent. Now, compare that to what we usually see happen digitally. It's age agnostic. A member will receive the same message regardless if they're 16 years old or 46 years old, because the tooling doesn't allow the credit union to go deeper than that, or it's too cumbersome to go deeper than that. So that's a couple of different insights as to how the disconnect exists insofar as targeting, timing, and personalization is concerned. I want to jump into, let's say we fast forward this movie forward, and we do end up target, time, and personalize digitally like we would have done in person. What's the result of that? Is the juice worth the squeeze on the other side? Well, before we answer that question, I like to give very practical, simple litmus tests to provide on each to understand if I took an agnostic generalized framework to my credit union to understand, am I targeting, timing, and personalizing appropriately? What questions should I ask? Allow me the opportunity to walk through three. The first on targeting is to understand if this individual walked into a branch, what would need to be true for my best MSR to suggest the product? And if that's not true, I probably shouldn't suggest the product. So to give an example here, using the same example that we talked about earlier of the personal loan promotion in August, if you have a 10,000 person credit union, to make the math easy, and you're promoting your personal loan to all 10,000 individuals, a nice litmus test to ask is, if I had, luckily, all 10,000 of those individuals have a consultation session with my MSR one-on-one, would my MSR agree that in each of those consultation sessions, a personal loan is the appropriate product for the member? If the answer to that question is no, the targeting is too broad. We have to narrow it down to what an MSR would do. Why? Because that's the playbook to expand the green line outward. That's the playbook to convert at-risk members to core members when they're not presenting themselves into a branch. Next comes timing. What question should we ask about timing? Well, the appropriate question to consider on timing is, how can we work backward from the member need as opposed to the credit unions? Or another way of saying this is, does the member's timeline justify where I'm going with this? I'll give you an example of that. So sticking with the onboarding example, often we'll see that if there is a call program, a automated email program, it'll eclipse on certain days, day 30, day 60, day 90. Who is to say that day 30 is the opportune time for every member in any instance to receive a product and promotion? Again, going back to the MSR, would your best MSR agree that day 30 for each of the individuals that you're touching for that promotion is the appropriate time to introduce the product? If the answer is no, the timing is too broad. We have to replicate what an MSR would have done in a branch, but do so digitally if we are to expect the same results. And lastly, on personalization, the question to ask is not, can I make someone feel special? That's a yes, no. It's a very low bar. But rather, how special can I make them feel? Ideally, prior to recommending a financial product. When I walk into a credit union, and why I decided to dedicate my life to credit unions is because I have felt that difference of people helping people. And from the Gen Z perspective, I can tell you it is downright awesome. But the personalization that usually happens digitally that we see is copy and pasted noticeably. So the question to ask on personalization is, how special can I make my recipient feel such that they leave that digital interaction feeling no less special than they would have left an in-branch experience? So given those three questions, let's talk about that juice being worth the squeeze. If we do this, if we ask these three questions on targeting, timing, personalization, and we implement tactics to answer them confidently, what happens on the backside? Is that juice evidently worth that squeeze? I'm going to flash up some stats. And as you guys can probably tell, I don't particularly enjoy reading words on a slide. You can do that yourself. So I'll give you a narration through this. And that is, regardless of what the intention and strategic objective is of the credit union, whether it is to increase deposits because interest rates are high and that's top of mind, or it's to increase loan volume and your loan to share is low, you're not doing indirect as an example, and you're looking to generate more income from the deposits you have. In either case, in either focus, on either side of the house, introducing a system that can make members create these sticky relationships is advantageous on either side, and it's advantageous fast if done well. So this now begs the question, the final consideration here, which is, if we have the appropriate plan to try and create these sticky relationships, how do we action on said plan? What is barring us from actioning on that plan today? I'll give you some perspective of what I see. The plan is pretty simple. We have to time, target, personalize like a good MSR would. The challenge with that plan is it usually is extremely, borderline untenably, taxing and laborious for credit unions to action on. To stick with the example that we've been talking about throughout the conversation, let's use the example of you want to promote a personal loan for credit card consolidation on external credit card balances with high APRs. It sounds pretty involved. Imagine what you'd have to do digitally to support that today. The data likely lives in your core, in your LOS, perhaps a third party even, like Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, or if you use Savvy Money, or services like them. You would then have to query the data, pull it, parse it, clean it, dedupe it, merge it across data sources, transfer it into a separate marketing platform, create that one-off campaign to promote the personal loan for those who have a high interest rate balance, send it out. If you're tired hearing me talk through it, I'm tired talking about it. It is an exorbitant amount of lift to do, let alone speak through. So this is the piece where I would be remiss not to mention, what is it that Sparrow actually does as a business? And this is probably the part where it's helpful for me to explain where we solve these challenges, solving the challenges of data constraints, where data lives in other systems spread across or different tables in the core, know-how constraints. How do I introduce these digital experiences that replicate an in-branch interaction and scale constraints? Well, on the Sparrow system, in a single sentence, what we do is help a credit union to create these sticky, multi-product relationships with membership without requiring an in-branch visit and without requiring core integration. Here's how it works. So the Sparrow platform is set up as a cloud-native marketing solution. And I'll explain a couple of the core pillars of how we do this. On our system, we have well over 100 credit unions currently leveraging us. We touch about 6.5 million members a week. As it turns out, credit unions are trying to solve the same challenges. Many credit unions want to take a auto loan member and convert them toward a checking account. Many credit unions want to front-run account dormancy. Many credit unions want to roll over a CD on a high yield into a more core depository product like a checking account. So what we have found is by having credit unions that have overlapping objectives that are all leveraging the Sparrow platform, what we have done is develop a system that can look across the peers that you have on our system and solution and identify which of the approaches is most successful, which is a best practice. And then what our system does is it will automatically rebuild the digital journey that is working well for your peer and provide that to you as a suggested best practice. So what we have effectively productized is a solve to the know-how constraint. Well, how do I introduce this approach digitally that represents what I'm doing in a branch? The answer to the question is let the rising tide lift all boats. Let the best practices, the highest performing digital campaigns be your guiding light to short circuit months or years of learning. The next piece is we can take in data from any source, whether it is the core, the LOS, systems like Savvy Money, third-party systems like Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, even non-member data. We can take that in without the team having to manually upload a file or manually ever cleanse that data. You do not need to match column headers, clean, email lists, dedupe, try and merge data across files to put it into one comprehensive report. None of that. Instead, we actually prefer the raw data. The raw data can be automatically transferred over to the Sparrow side. And what happens from there is we have built a native parsing engine in something called an SFTP. Technical jargon aside, it's like a secure OneDrive folder that lives in the cloud. And once the data file hits the folder, our system automatically breaks down the information across files from across sources. It parses it, cleans it, processes it, and puts it into the platform for the team's consideration and queryability. And lastly, the actioning on the insights can be entirely automated. Of course, I'll show you an example of how this works. But to stick with the example, one of the examples that we've been talking about so far of trying to get in front of an opportunity, like for example, trying to get in front of account dormancy. Here's an example of the system in action. Now, I've kept myself in the Zoom tile on the right-hand side, so you can see that this is not a sped up recording. This is not pre-edited or, fast-forwarded. Instead, this is a live demonstration for a partner leveraging the solution. What you're going to see me do here in just a moment is I'm going to create a marketing journey in the Sparrow platform. And the marketing journey is comprised, the entire architecture of the system has been built around what an MSR would have done in a branch, we'll do digitally. So what were our three key insights? It was time, target, and personalize, like a good MSR would have done, but we do that digitally. The Sparrow solution allows us to automate the timing, targeting, and personalization that would have happened in a branch, but do so digitally without the team having to manually intervene to create it, transfer data into it, or see the actioning from it. So here's an example of me creating one of these automations to front-run account dormancy. The idea is we're going to start by selecting a trigger event. The trigger event is your timing. And in this case, you're going to see me search for the date of the last transaction is more than 90 days ago. And I'll pause here for a moment. If a population hasn't transacted at the credit union in 3 months, they're not necessarily at risk, but they risk being at risk. So what a good MSR would do is they take it a step deeper. They would say, okay, I know my starting population, but now I need to further refine my targeting. I need to understand who of those who haven't transacted in 3 months is truly at risk. So what we're going to do is introduce some further targeting. We're going to check to see, well, if they have online banking, have they logged in the last 4 months? Or if they have a savings account, is that balance still less than $50? Reason we're checking that is to see, well, if they had a larger savings account balance, no worries. They're likely not going to go anywhere. But if they still just have that low, initial deposit and they haven't transacted in 3 months or haven't logged in 4 months, this is starting to be an at-risk population that risks dormancy. And what we'll do is we will, to the end of making sure that we're refining the exact population we want to speak to, we're going to check their checking account balance and see if it's less than $100. And then we're going to personalize who we're talking to. We're going to introduce the message to those whose age is less than 35. I save the automation, I jump out, I go to the messages, and what I'm going to do in the messages is build one either from scratch, or in this case, this is a template. This template is the actual message, the best practice that is currently working well, provided to you as a starting place. It, of course, is totally adjustable, like any good email editor is, where you can adjust the text copy, font, images, buttons, all of that, of course. And then once you've settled on the message that you want to introduce to the member, the personalized one-on-one message itself, you can save the message, return back to the automation to front run account dormancy, include the message in the automation, and activate the automation. So I'm jumping into the automation, which is this one that we had just created. I'm including that message, which is the one that we had just built. I'm saving it, and then I'm going to go ahead and click that activate button. And upon clicking activate, you can see that the status turns active. That indicates that this automation is now running. Now, I know that we've gone pretty deep tactically, so I'll just zoom out strategically and make a mention to say, technology aside, what we started today's conversation off with was this consideration around how do we build those sticky multi-product relationships with all of membership, especially those elusive pockets like Gen Z and millennial members who predominantly don't come into branches. Well, the answer to the question is pretty simple. If they're not going to come into a branch, we've got to bring the branch communication to the member. We've got to time, target, and personalize like a good MSR would have done. The challenge with doing so today is how taxing and laborious it is to achieve that digitally. What we exist to solve is that problem. Ensure the credit union can introduce a digital experience and communication to membership that would have resembled what an in-branch interaction could have provided without expecting the in-branch visit and without straining the team's time. Now, knowing that we're at the 45 mark, I want to leave time for about 15 minutes for any Q&A, any questions. So what I'll do is I'm going to flash up here on the screen. This is a QR code. If you scan this QR code and you want to have this presentation afterwards, I'll send it to you. Or if you want to talk to me afterwards in a one-on-one capacity, I'm happy to chat with you offline. So if you feel free, scan the QR code and include, the consideration that you'd like to chat, or if you want the presentation, let me know, and I'll go ahead and follow up. I'm going to cut myself off there to leave 15 minutes for any questions that arise, and just thank everybody for jumping on live and participating. I got the first private message, which is being asked, so do we work with partners that are, basically, what's the size of membership of credit unions that we'll work with? We have partners that are 36 billion in assets. So PenFed's our largest partner. They're the nation's third largest credit union. Our smallest partner is 6 million in assets with literally one employee. We span the gamut so wide and so far because, and to emphasize, we truly don't require lift from the team. We measure a launch in terms of days, not weeks, months, or quarters. And being on a credit union board, I've come to appreciate just how impactful a light lift can be for teams. So to the question that was raised, we span the gamut from 36 billion large down to 6 million small. I'm getting another question. This question is, how is the Sparrow platform different from incumbent solutions like Constant Contact or MailChimp? So Sparrow, well, first and foremost, if you think about how Constant Contact and MailChimp are leveraged today, the first consideration is, how do you get data into those systems? It's manual. You pull the data from the core. You've got to pre-filter the data to understand if, or to target any level, beyond just all of membership. You've got to query the data with filters applied to it or filter it in Excel. You then upload manually the data into Constant Contact and then manually send out the message, either that or MailChimp. Now compare that to the Sparrow experience. The data transfer from your system to ours is automated. You don't touch the data. And the actioning on the platform is automated. The system will trigger the message to send when relevant on hyper-targeted segments of membership. So the constant contact system is great for what it was when it was introduced 14 years ago, but it's now left the digital experience of credit unions noticeably behind what would have happened if a member walked into a branch. We come in to pick up the slack. We come in to make that delta in difference non-existent. Okay. All right, I'm getting another one of what are the main questions I should be taking back to our team to assess how well our current system operates? Great question. I would say 3 big questions to ask your team to assess how well the system operates. Question number 1, how manual is our process in data transfer, in content creation, in execution, like actual sending of those messages? How manual is that? Second question to ask, are you able to track the down funnel conversion? So if you send out a message about a personal loan, do you know for a bona fide result, did it convert to a personal loan? Yes or no? What assumptions are baked into the consideration of conversion? And the third question to ask is, what level of support does our current system provide me beyond the platform? What level of partnership do they provide? Meaning, am I meeting with a rep from that provider on a weekly cadence, on a biweekly cadence, on a monthly cadence? Those 3 questions are extremely important as they're the 3 that usually hold credit unions back from being able to replicate an in-branch experience digitally. To answer those 3 questions on the Sparrow side, for the first, both the data transfer and the data actioning, totally automated. On the second, you can do the down funnel conversion in the platform to understand exactly how many, for example, personal loans came from a campaign that was created. And on the third, for every relationship that we get involved with, we have a dedicated partner success manager. Their entire job is to serve as an extension of your team. They don't wait, retroactively or reactively to receive your questions and then answer them as they arise. They're a proactive extension of your team. So they're going to meet with you at the cadence you want to meet, whether it is weekly, biweekly, monthly, quarterly. And prior to those meetings, they will bring suggested best practices from peers to the discussion for you to use the time to review and activate, to turn the time that you're spending on this away from creation to curation. You're able to have a higher leverage of the time that you're spending because we're taking the work off of the team's plate. That was a great question. All right, I'm getting another one of how do you protect our data? And do you have a solution where your team handles the entire process? 2 great ones. First, on the data protection. Sparrow is, as you can imagine, because of how many credit unions we serve, extraordinarily buttoned up insofar as our data privacy, data security, and confidentiality is concerned. So we have a 5-tiered system of safeguards. First, we're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, have been for years. Second, we hire CPAs to annually audit our policies against our procedures to ensure alignment. Third, we annually have white glove engineers try and test vulnerabilities in our system. Thus far, in the years they've been doing it, nothing's ever been arisen. Fourth, our largest partners, like for example, PenFed, conduct annual due diligence assessments on Sparrow themselves to see if they can expose any vulnerabilities. They haven't found anything. And fifth and final is in the relationship, we provide contractual guarantees to you on how we'll handle data, how we'll secure data, how the data will become private and only accessible to you, purged from our system at your request. It is entirely owned by you. Nothing else is done with the data. And we will provide the certificates of insurance that we have to show our financial standing to indeed back up the guarantees of safeguarding that data. Now, to the second question of do you have a solution where your team handles the entire process? Short answer is yes, we do. We have teams, credit unions, that see to it that Sparrow has effectively become that arm of the credit union that is in charge of the actioning of building these sticky multi-product relationships via the marketing function. Other teams will say, hey, we have staff for that, and we want you to be an extension of their efforts synergistically. I would say mostly that's the case. Most credit unions will have, even if it's not somebody solely dedicated to marketing, you'll largely have somebody already on the marketing function. And we exist to be an accelerant to their efforts and ensure that it can match what's happening in a branch. But if the team would prefer that Sparrow handle the entire process, we have done that in the past. Um, this is interesting. So, question was asked, what makes Sparrow different from other systems that are slightly larger, like Marquee Documatics, HubSpot, or Salesforce? So, a couple things. First and foremost, because I'll first compare Sparrow to HubSpot and Salesforce, then we can go over to more credit union focused solutions like Documatics, Marquee, or others. So HubSpot, Salesforce, there's a handful of considerations that are relevant. The first is just generally, I've heard partners talk about how it feels like they're paying for an F-35 when using HubSpot or Salesforce, but using it like a Cessna. And that's true. These are massive monolith systems that have been evolved to meet every business need in every industry over the last 25 years. And so while it can feel like they got a lot of functionality under the hood, 95+% isn't being leveraged, but is being paid for. The second consideration is these systems like HubSpot, Salesforce were not built for credit unions. They're built for industry, business. Here's one notable takeaway of why that's a deficiency. HubSpot or Salesforce will require that each unique person in their system, each member, has their own email address. Think about why that's a problem. You might have a household that has one email address, but 4 people. HubSpot or Salesforce cannot distinguish between those 4 people. It would consider all 4 of those just one person because each unique person has to have a unique email address. And so if you wanted to start doing targeted marketing that distinguishes between a household, but they all share one email, you'd be unable to do so. Or said otherwise, say somebody has 2 checking accounts. So I've got one checking account, like a standard checking account, and a second one that's a rewards checking. Okay. Well, each of those accounts is going to have the same email address. In HubSpot or Salesforce, you won't be able to distinguish between accounts because you have to have a unique email per account. So you might want to target messaging on the second, the rewards checking, because they qualified for some reward, but HubSpot might only let you consider the standard checking or vice versa. So when these systems aren't built for credit unions, when you get into the weeds of them, issues arise, which is why we've grown so fast. So just for some perspective, we have grown the marketing side of our solution extraordinarily quickly. We're at a pace now where we're onboarding credit unions between 6 and 15 a month. And most of them are actually coming over from incumbent systems like Constant Contact, Documatics, Marquee, HubSpot, Salesforce, because of the tediousness and taxing efforts of those incumbents and the way in which we can solve the challenges they face today. But it's a phenomenal question. Okay, can you talk about the pricing structure? So we do not charge an implementation fee. We do not charge a per member fee. We do not charge a support fee. So all that work that I was talking about of our partner success manager being a proactive extension of your team, you can meet with them weekly for 5 years in a row. You're never going to get a bill. We do not nickel and dime in that capacity. Instead, what we do is simply charge an annual subscription for the software based on the asset and membership size of the credit union. So with a credit union as large as 36 billion in assets and as small as 6 million in assets, you have to be able to judge the economics bespoke to the size of the credit union. Else, you won't be able to work with either end. So what we've done is ensure that the economics are always comfortably in the strike zone of the credit union. And if you're curious about what it is for your credit union, feel free to scan that QR code. We'll set up a time and I'm happy to bring it to a subsequent conversation.
All right. Thank you very much, Harrison. Provided a lot of useful information today. I hope everyone found some value in attending today's session. If anyone was not able to scan the QR code for some reason and would like to set up a meeting with Harrison or Jacob, please feel free to reach out to myself or Amanda, and we can certainly put you in touch with them. Harrison, thank you very much for presenting today. Appreciate it. And like I said, if anyone has questions, we are more than happy to answer them and then put you in touch with Harrison. Everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.